Karen decided that my fence was in the wrong place and removed it to expand her garden. The problem? She forgot to ask my bulls what they thought of the idea. Living next to an HOA is bad enough, but living next to a woman who thinks she owns everything? That's real hell. Ever since I bought my property, this woman has tried everything to convince me to change my fence. First, there were the ridiculous letters from the HOA, suggesting that perhaps my fence was too rustic for neighborhood standards. Then came the subtle hints at community meetings, insinuating that perhaps the condominium would look nicer if there were fewer barriers separating the properties. But the worst part was that she didn't like my farm. She had complained several times that my bulls were noisy, that they didn't fit in with the sophisticated atmosphere of the condominium, and that they made the place look like a corral instead of a planned neighborhood. What this woman never understood is that my farm was here before any of them. The HOA didn't exist when I bought this piece of land. They came later, built a condominium next door, and decided they could call the shots. But the truth is that my land is not part of the HOA. They can call the shots about the color of their houses, about what kind of grass the neighbors can plant, but my piece of land is out of their hands, and I never had a problem with that, until this woman decided she wanted to expand her land. At first, I didn't notice. One day, during my morning rounds, I noticed that some of the fence posts were leaning a little. Nothing too striking, but enough for me to notice. I thought it was strange, but I didn't take much notice. Over time, wood rots, strong winds make small changes, and sometimes animals can rub up against the posts and end up bending them a little. But then, things got worse. A few days later, I realized that some parts of the wire were loose. It didn't look accidental. It was as if someone had cut it and then tried to put it back to disguise it. It wasn't until I noticed fresh footprints near the fence, and not of animals, but of boots, that my suspicion turned to certainty. Someone was tampering with my fence, and I already had a good idea who it was. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened the next day. I woke up early as usual and went out to feed the animals. When I got close to the edge of my land, I almost fell over backwards. My fence was gone. Not a piece of it, not a few loose posts. Half of my fence was simply no longer there. The posts had been pulled out, the wires cut and thrown away, and where there had once been a clear division between my farm and the condominium, there was now a newly planted lawn and a perfectly organized garden. I stood still for a moment, trying to understand what the hell was going on. And then I looked up. On the balcony of the house next door, there she was. The woman was watching me, with a smile. She was holding a glass of wine in her hand, leaning against the railing, as if she were simply enjoying the view. Except that the view was my land. It was obvious what had happened. She wanted to expand her garden, so she decided that my plot was now hers. It was as simple as that, without asking, without warning, without any shame in her face. She literally tore down my fence to steal a piece of my land. I stood still for a few seconds, looking at the mess she'd made. Then I looked at my bulls, which were on the other side of the pasture, now without a fence to hold them back. Then I slowly turned my gaze back to her. The woman expected me to freak out. She was expecting me to go over there and talk. She was expecting a dramatic scene where she could play the victim. But I didn't say anything. I just took a deep breath, smiled slightly, and went back into the house. If this woman thought she could take my land without consequences, she was about to receive a visit she would never forget. Because if there's one thing my bulls love, it's a good open space to run around in. The morning after my fence disappeared, I made a point of not touching anything. I didn't go to make amends. I didn't call the HOA, let alone the police. I just kept quiet, because I knew that nature would take care of returning everything to its rightful place. And that's exactly what happened. At 6 in the morning, when I went out for my morning routine, I saw that the situation was already well in hand. My bulls, all 5 of them, had left the pasture and were now strolling around the woman's new garden. It was a wonderful scene. The well-trimmed lawn, destroyed by heavy hooves that had torn holes in the soil? The expensive flowers she had planted? Now, they were just crumpled leaves and broken stems after being chewed up and spat out. The expensive ceramic vases she ordered especially for the new play area? They became toys for the bulls, who unceremoniously knocked over and kicked everything. She spent weeks transforming that space into a perfect backyard. And now, in less than an hour, it looked like a battlefield. And the best part? She still didn't know. I stood there, leaning against the balcony, quietly sipping my coffee, waiting for the moment when she finally came out of the house and saw the result of her own mistake. It didn't take long. Around 7:30, her front door opened. The woman came out with her cup of coffee, straightened her robe, and stopped in the middle of the porch. She stood there, watching the scene, as if her brain was trying to convince itself that it wasn't real. But it was. One of the bulls, indifferent to the woman's shock, was scratching its back against the wooden posts of the newly installed pergola. The sway of the animal's weight made the structure creak, threatening to collapse at any moment. Another was digging the ground with its hooves, creating a small puddle of mud right in the middle of the lawn. And the third, the biggest of them all, accidentally headbutted one of the ceramic vases, which shattered on the ground into 1,000 pieces. The silence lasted a few seconds, and then she screamed. The scream that came out of the woman's mouth was pure despair and indignation. She dropped the cup, which fell to the floor and shattered, and ran into the house. But she didn't stay there for long. The door opened again, and this time she came back with a squeegee in her hand. I almost spat out my coffee with laughter. Did she really think a squeegee was going to work against a group of bulls weighing almost 800 kilos each? "Get out of here!" The woman swung the squeegee in the air, trying to scare the animals away, as if she were dealing with pigeons in a square. But the bulls? They didn't give a damn. They continued to explore the newly acquired yard without showing the slightest interest in her presence. She tried running one way, then the other, waving her squeegee frantically. Nothing worked. It was then that she finally realized that she couldn't solve this alone. She grabbed her cell phone and started calling desperately. And, as I expected, it didn't take long for one of the HOA representatives to show up. A man in a suit and tie, looking like he'd never seen a farm animal in his life. As soon as he arrived and saw the absolute chaos that was happening in the woman's garden, his expression went from confused to terrified. "My God, what's happened here?" The woman ran to him like a child seeking shelter from the storm. "These monsters are destroying my property! You have to do something." The man looked at the bulls, then at her, and then at the missing fence. He was beginning to understand the real problem. It was at this point that I finally decided to enter the conversation. I approached calmly, crossing my arms and pretending to be surprised. "Wow, what happened here?" The woman turned on the spot, her face red with fury. "Your cattle have invaded my garden." I tried to look as innocent as possible. "Invaded? But what about the fence?" She froze. That was the exact moment she realized she was screwed. The HOA representative realized it too. He frowned and looked around again. "Wait, was the fence removed?" I shook my head slowly. "That's right. I was going to ask just that. My fence was here until yesterday. But this morning, I woke up and it was gone. Pretty strange, huh?" The woman opened and closed her mouth a few times, trying to come up with an excuse. But there was no excuse. Now everyone could see what had really happened. She had broken down my fence to steal my land, and now she was paying the price. The HOA representative looked at her with an expression that mixed confusion and irritation. "Karen, did you remove his fence?" She paled. "Minus, I thought it was in the wrong place." I laughed, loudly. "So you thought the best way to solve this was to just rip it down? Without asking?" The man from the HOA frowned. Now he knew he had a big problem on his hands, because what she'd done wasn't just a little mistake. It was trespassing, and she knew that, if I wanted to, She could call the police right then and there. The woman crossed her arms and took a deep breath, trying to maintain her pose. Well, now that the damage is done, you can just collect your animals and rebuild the fence in the right place, can't you? She said it like she was doing me a favor, as if I was the one in the wrong. But now, I was the one in control. And if she thought she was going to get out of this so easily, she was very wrong. Because now, it was my turn to play. And I already knew exactly what I was going to do next. The woman was trying to hold her pose, but you could see the panic in her eyes. She knew she was in trouble. She tried to play it smart. She tried to justify the unjustifiable. She even tried to turn the situation around to make me look the wrong one. But none of that changed the fact that she had torn down my fence without my permission, stolen a chunk of my land, and now she had a little 800-pound problem trampling what was left of her garden. The HOA representative crossed his arms, clearly trying to process everything. Karen, this is a serious problem. You can't just remove someone's fence without permission. She widened her eyes, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. But I thought the fence was in the wrong place. And who gave you the authority to decide that? The silence was deafening. She turned pale. Until then, she had thought she would have the support of the HOA. But now she realized that no one there wanted to get burned because of her. It was at that moment that I realized it was my chance to play some more. Well, now that my fence is gone, I have a problem. My bulls need a well-defined boundary, or they might end up in places they shouldn't be. Like, for example, your yard. The woman's gaze went from irritation to pure despair. You have to get them out of here now. I feigned regret. I'd do it. But without a fence, how can I guarantee that they won't come back? After all, you've expanded your garden, haven't you? Now they think this space is part of their territory. She blinked a few times, her mouth opening and closing, unable to form a coherent response. This is absurd! You need to solve this problem immediately! I crossed my arms and looked at the HOA representative. Well, come on. Who exactly has to solve this problem? The person who kept their animals fenced in, respecting the boundaries of the property? Or the person who decided they could take down that fence because they wanted a bit more space to plant flowers? The man hesitated, looked at her, then at me, and sighed. Karen, you need to fix this. Her face turned red with anger. What? But I have nothing to do with these animals. The representative rubbed his forehead, clearly out of patience. It was you who removed the fence. It was you who altered the property boundary. Now, you need to find a solution. I had to stop myself from smiling. Now she was trapped. If I refused to rebuild my fence, I might as well leave the bulls where they were. And she knew that. With every passing minute, her yard was getting more destroyed. The woman was about to explode with frustration. This couldn't be happening, but it was. And I hadn't finished yet. Oh, and one more thing. I want my fence back exactly as it was before. That means you'll have to pay for the new material and the installation. After all, it was you who removed it without permission. The woman opened her mouth to protest, but the HOA representative interrupted before she could begin. Karen, he's right. You need to pay for the repairs. Now, yes, the final blow. The silence that followed was simply perfect. She was at a complete loss. She had destroyed my fence, stolen my land, and now she was being forced to pay to rebuild it. And meanwhile, the bulls were still there, tearing down the last vestiges of her dignity. The woman finally realized that she had no choice. She huffed, her shoulders stiff, her jaw clenched. Okay, I'll pay for the damn fence, but you need to get these monsters out of here now. I made sure to hold back a satisfied smile. Great. As soon as the money's in my account, I'll sort it out. She looked at me as if she wanted to kill me, but there was nothing I could do. She'd lost. And what about me? I was just enjoying every second of her humiliation. The woman lost. She realized it the very moment the HOA representative told her she would have to pay for the damages. But accepting defeat, that was another story. You could see the hatred on her face, her lips tight, her eyes wide, as if she were about to explode at any moment. But, for the first time since this mess began, she had no way out. She tried to be clever and knocked down my fence to expand her garden. She thought she could intimidate me by pretending that the whole thing was an honest mistake, and that I should just accept the invasion of my own land. She tried to put the blame on me, saying that I was responsible for the loose bulls. But now, she was the one who had to pay for the damage. And the bulls? Well, they were still enjoying the new yard. The biggest one, Thor, was digging a huge mud puddle right in the middle of her lawn. Another was cutting down the last few bushes that were still standing. I just watched, savoring every second of this spectacle. After letting out another forced sigh and looking around as if hoping for a miracle, the woman finally picked up her cell phone. She opened the bank's app, her trembling fingers typing in the numbers, and within a few minutes, the transfer was done. "That's it," she spoke between her teeth, as if each letter were a dead weight on her tongue. I took out my cell phone, checked the account, and, as soon as I saw that the money had gone through, I smiled. Great! Now we can sort this out. I went over to the bulls and started whistling, calling them back. Gradually, one by one, they left the woman's destroyed yard and returned to the pasture. But before the last one left, he made a point of leaving a special gift. That's right. The bull simply crouched down and left a pile of poo right in the middle of her driveway. And when she saw it, her soul left her body. No, 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 this can't be happening. She picked up the squeegee that was still lying on the ground and tried to brush the dirt away. But the more she moved it, the worse it got. The HOA representative looked at me, then at the chaotic scene in front of the house, and shook his head in disbelief. Well, I guess everything's settled here. Ah, yes, of course, I replied, trying to hold back my laughter. He said goodbye quickly and left as fast as he could, clearly wanting to get away from the mess. What about me? I hadn't finished yet. The woman was still busy trying to get rid of the bull's gift when I decided to put one last finishing touch to the story. I crossed my arms and, with a casual tone, asked, "So, Karen, when do you plan to rebuild my fence?" She stopped, her shoulders stiffening. "What's it like?" I gestured to the empty space where my fence used to be. "You've already paid for the materials, but the fence still needs to be installed. And since you were the one who knocked it down, I think it's only fair that you take care of it." Her face turned purple with anger. "That doesn't make sense. You already have the money. Why don't you have someone else do it?" "Oh, yes, I can do that," I shrugged. "But then I'll have to charge for the service as well. You know how it is. Labor isn't cheap these days." She got so angry that I thought she was going to explode right there. But there was nothing I could do. She was already at rock bottom. So, without saying another word, she took out her cell phone and started searching for fence installation companies. What about me? I just watched in satisfaction as the woman who tried to steal my land now had to pay to get it back. The following week, the workers showed up and rebuilt my fence exactly where it had always been. The woman was locked inside the house throughout the process, probably trying to ignore the fact that her attempted theft had not only failed, but had cost her dearly. And her garden? Well, the lawn was never the same again. The flowers, the shrubs, the expensive vases, all destroyed. And the best part? Even after cleaning everything up, the smell of the damage the bulls had left behind took weeks to escape. Every time she left the house and smelled that scent in the air, she knew exactly who was responsible. And I made a point of waving and giving her a smile whenever we crossed paths, because in the end, she tried to take what was mine. But she was the one who ended up paying the price. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.